Hello, Matthew. I continue my comments on the videos that you made about German idealism, and hopefully you've watched, when the time comes, the first two videos, and hopefully they have enabled you to understand yourself and the world better. And I will start commenting on the video number 5, Goethe, the video about Goethe. And I wrote that, according to Goethe, mind and nature are in a continuous circuit. And this is the famous quote from Spinoza that man is not an empire within an empire, that man lives in the continuity of nature. And in the view of Spinoza, man is the product of nature, and to think that man can extract himself out of nature is a delusion, and that man should be considered as modes of nature and that they obey natural laws. I'm not necessarily in agreement with this view, but it's a moment in the self-cognition of man and nature. And the Spinozian moment in our modern present day life is the moment of sociobiology, and the great taboo in the scientific and intellectual spheres in the modern West is sociobiology, because the idea that men and women might be determined by their biology, that they are not free agents solely determined by sociological laws or environment, is an idea which is vigorously fought against and refuted, or there's an attempt to refute this idea. But in the realm of politics, the leftists, they often love to explain the behaviors of individuals in terms of socio-economical determinism. But if you proposed the idea that the socio-economic behaviors of men are determined by, partly at least, by their biological determinism, they would find this thought horrifying, and they would reject it. But if one wishes to be a Spinozian and a Goethean, in the sense that mind and nature are in a continuity, in a continuous relationship, then the moment of sociobiology is a necessary moment, because one has to acknowledge that the mind and behaviors and beliefs of human beings are partly, not only, but partly determined by their own biological history, which is in the continuity of the biological history of life. And to understand that a human being is partly determined to act, think, behave the way he does because of his biology, it's not racism, it's simply realism. And there, with a proper understanding, one does not hate the other for being what he is, but the more one understands that he is determined to act the way he does, the greater the intellectual understanding grows, and the greater the love. And I believe that all thinking minds are universally identical, that truth is universal and logical and the same for all thinking minds, but the soul of man is partly determined by their geography and their relation to biology, and each, that's a Hegelian idea, each people has a Volkgeist, which is peculiar to its own particular biological determinism. And any mind can penetrate into the universal logical aspect of any religious doctrine, but there are cultural and religious aspects which are peculiar to a given particular people and which belongs solely to these people, precisely because men are all identical and equal in thought and mind, but they are all different in their particular biological determinations, and they are all different in their singularities. So that's a logical problem which can only be solved through logic and universal mental cognition. And then the idea that there's a conflict within the mind of God, probably, between evolution and emanation. Evolution is the idea that the superior springs forth from the inferior, that life comes from inanimate matter, and that intelligence in the form of human reason comes from the most primitive forms of biological organism. That's an evolutionary view. And the other view is that the world is an emanation of a principle, the one in the Neoplatonist tradition, and that the superior degenerates in a way into an inferior vision of itself, and that the purpose is to be brought back to the unity of the superior mental intellect by a cognitive process. This is Neoplatonism and even Platonism in a way. And the two views in the realm of the philosophy of nature is, on the one hand, cosmological and Darwinian evolution, the idea that the Big Bang produced the material physical universe, which created the conditions for the emergence of life, which developed into thinking minds who can reflect back upon their own natural, physical, biological history and give to nature a full consciousness of itself and of its own history. And I'm not familiar with Schelling's philosophy, but I guess that in his view, the cosmic conflict of the opposing forces which produce the explosion of stars and these opposing forces, they were unconsciously present in our very biology, because the atoms from which our bodies are made of come from the explosion of stars, and an atom cannot feel violence, but maybe it can in a way by manifesting, in this cosmological view, remnants of this primordial conflict within the heart of the universe, and it expresses this through the means of poetry and mythology and human speech. And that is a view that in my personal development I have adopted, that the cosmos, I said to myself, the stars can't think, but we can think for them, and we can tell their own story, and we can reveal the truth about the stars, because we are made of stardust. So I adopted this cosmological, poetic, romantic, Schellingian, maybe, I'm not familiar enough with Schelling, but Schellingian vision of our cosmic existence. But this evolutionary view, the way I interpret it, is a delusion produced by reason to backwardly project its own history of development, and that the truth is that nature is not, mind is not a superior form of nature. It is nature which is an inferior, a fallen, an alienated version of mind. This is the philosophy of Hegel, the idea that nature is produced by the alienation, the fallenness of the logical idea. And spirit, or mind, the individual consciousness, begins by presupposing that it itself is a product of nature, and that nature exists independently of consciousness. But when the consciousness is plunged within nature, this is the beginning of the Phenomenology of Spirit of Hegel. It is in a search for understanding and trying to grasp being, which becomes an object of sense perception and then of understanding, and it tries to grasp what is. And consciousness begins with very simple very limited categories with a very simple relationship to the object, and by thinking activity and practical activity, it transforms its relationship with being, which is an object, and into ever higher, ever more complex, ever richer, ever more developed forms of consciousness, until it realizes that it is consciousness which, by a mysterious process, projects nature. So, the way I see things, nature is an emanation of reason, but at the same time, reason, in order to become itself, must evolve and transform and progress through the work of the negative to elevate itself to its own absolute standpoint. So, I believe that everything is rational, for better and for worse. So, reason must be able to give an account of the cosmological Darwinian process, even though strictly speaking, reason does not believe that it is how things have unfolded. It must nonetheless find reason in illusion, in a way. Yeah. And then I noted while you spoke about Goethe that in my personal development I realized by reading Hegel that Hegel is very harsh against Newton. And I've read Anglo-Saxon philosophers who are not very nice to German thinkers. They believe that they are some sort of crazy, speculative, nonsensical, armchair thinking idealists lost in the realm of nonsensical abstraction. So I said to myself, philosophy is the most real of all truth. And when one witnessed the violence in philosophical debates amongst the Germans and the English, what if World War I and World War II were a manifestation in the realm of politics and geopolitics of the internal conflicts within philosophy between the Germans and the English? Because the way Goethe and Hegel treat Newton, the way Locke and Leibniz, although Leibniz was a gentleman, but there were deep conflicts between the English view of the universe and of mind and of psychology and of epistemology and the German view. And yeah, that's a hypothesis, but probably it's nonsensical. But there's an enmity between the German and the English within the realm of philosophy. And one exemplification of that is Newton versus Goethe and Hegel. I said that spirit was very serious, but also comical. And hopefully you've watched the first two videos before watching this, because I asked myself while watching this video, where does homosexuality come from the point of view of God? Why would there be homosexuals in the mind of God? And a comical attempt to answer this question is that I am not a homosexual, but when I look at your videos about German idealism, I said to myself, well, Matthew is an attractive man, and it's there's something fascinating about such a man talking about German idealism and being so poetic and romantic, and maybe there's 1% homosexuality within me, but yeah, Hegel said that a little bit of negative is already in the process of becoming completely negative, that if you are not 100% heterosexual, you are homosexual, something like that. Maybe Hegel could find some dialectical, nonsensical explanation to try to justify it. But yeah, I was just thinking about this, that there is something attractive about an intelligent man talking about romantic philosophy and an idealist perspective and things, and that this may be what the ancient Greeks felt when they had their homosexual endeavors, which were strange, which appear strange to the mind of a modern man. But yeah, I also wrote that maybe I love women too much for my own good, because from the perspective of God, woman is the other of God, and the other of God is also nature, and nature is the realm of suffering and death, and women are a cause of great suffering, but also love and beauty. So God has an ambiguous relationship with women, which is the other of God, and the other is the self. So women and the woman archetype is a part of God himself. So yeah. Then about the phenomenology of spirit, the video on Hegel. Being, pure being, is identical with itself, and so is nothing. Pure nothing is nothing, but it contains being because it is nothing. So being is nothing, and nothing is nothing. So at the root of everything, there is this dialectical tension between being and nothing. And this is the beginning of Hegel's logic. And in the realm of modern empirical science, the modern physicists explain that the reason why there is something rather than nothing is because at the primordial quantum level of cosmological unfolding, pure nothing is positively charged, or there are potentialities of virtualities of being springing forth from nothing. So even at the cosmological physical level, Hegel's logic is still there. So yeah. So being and nothing are identical, but they are nonetheless different. And this instability, this primordial instability at the root of everything, must find a way to solve the dialectical unrest. And the whole process of being consists in trying to re-establish self-identity. And the formal definition of the absolute for Hegel is the identity of identity and difference. So being and nothing must, out of logical necessity, differentiate themselves from one another and try to re-establish their own relation to self. And I wrote that the logical necessity is a will, an urge to re-establish self-identity. And I know myself to be the negative, and that I am confronting my own substance. And the reason why no one really understands Hegel, and the reason why I understand Hegel more than anyone else without having any formal training in philosophy, is because only the negative can understand Hegel. And the Phenomenology of Spirit is not the book written by Hegel supposedly in 1807. A very profound idea which is so difficult to understand is that if the object, the other of consciousness, is the manifestation of spirit, one must presuppose that the book supposedly written by Hegel in 2007 is itself a manifestation of spirit. So that consciousness, in the process of becoming absolutely conscious of itself, will find on its path the book written by Hegel called the Phenomenology of Spirit. But those who try to seek the meaning of the Phenomenology of Spirit in the book written by Hegel, and just in the book, they cannot understand, because the Phenomenology of Spirit is the unfolding of consciousness in the world, in the present. It is what is happening in everyday experience. Because we are one spirit separated into a subject and an object, the negative and the substance. And yeah, I wrote that I made videos on my channel about the phenomenology of the European mind, which becomes the phenomenology of the European spirit, which becomes the phenomenology of spirit. The European spirit is just a particular moment in the unfolding and the development of world spirit, which is the only spirit. And the figures of consciousness that I have experienced and intellectually gone through or adopted during my own personal development, which have led me to the point of view of reason, they included within themselves their own opposite. They were contradictory and they had to be dialectically negated. And let me take an example. For every socialist, there is a libertarian. For every white nationalist, there is an anti-white or a non-white nationalist. It's a dialectical process of unfolding. And today, there is a villain arising, Vladimir Putin. And this rise of evil in the mind of the Western people produces, by a dialectical fashion, the rise of the hero, the president of the Ukraine, the president of Ukraine, which is considered as a hero. And these two men are figures of consciousness. They are modes through which the rise of world spirit become manifest to itself, and we are living within the phenomenology of spirit, not the book by Hegel, but the real phenomenal appearance determined by logical laws of spirit, which is one and which has been separated from itself. And I know it because I have the point of view of the negative, and I am trying to share my perspective to re-establish my identity, my spiritual unity with otherness, of which you, Matthew, and anyone watching this also, but I'm speaking directly to you, you are a moment. And you must recognize yourself and understand yourself as a mode, as a figure of consciousness, determined by the entire unfolding of world spirit. I wrote that, I don't know why I wrote this, but there is an ID within an ID within an ID within an ID, and this is God's infinite intelligence. I wrote that the attempt to understand the book by Hegel is a moment in the process of spirit becoming conscious of itself. I wrote that this is insane and brilliant. And yeah, more seriously, the moment of force and understanding. It's the third part, the third chapter, the third section of the book. Hegel says that the mind is confronted by an objective world. And by thinking what is beyond the objective world, inside the objective world, within the interior of the objective world, it creates the phenomenon and the world of phenomena, because before the activity of mind in the realm of science, modern, classical, empirical, rationalistic science, before the mind splits the object into laws and forces and phenomena, the phenomena do not exist. It is objective world. It is being. It is only the phenomena is the phenomena of that which is manifested through the phenomena. So the objective world becomes phenomenal when the mind thinks and realizes that there is something above or beyond, and the mind transforms the object into a thought. The laws of physics are not written in the sky. They must be perceived through the mind. The mind attributes laws, regularities, forces to the objective world, which becomes the phenomenal world. And from a Kantian perspective, we predicate the categories of our own mind to the thought of the object. So Hegel says that what the mind discovers when he goes beyond the objective world into the realm of laws, the quiet, peaceful realm of laws, is his own categories. So by looking behind or beyond or inside the phenomena, the mind discovers himself. And to illustrate this, we are, from a cosmological Darwinian perspective, we are manifestations of the laws of nature. So nature is a mirror of ourselves. When we contemplate nature, we contemplate that which has given birth to us. And when we think about the laws of nature, the peaceful realm of laws and determinations which bring about the constant change of nature, we are thinking about the laws which have gave us our existence. So we are thinking about our own intellectual self. We are thinking about ourselves. And we are nature becoming conscious of itself. And I just read this morning a book by Whitehead. He says that Newton, grasping the laws of universal gravitation, the way I interpret this, he said that it was a powerful moment in the development of human reason, and it brought about technological and scientific changes. But the moment of Newton, from a cosmological Darwinian perspective, is the moment when nature, through the mediation of the man that we call Isaac Newton, grasp its own, one of its fundamental laws. So it's nature, through the mediation of a mind, grasping itself and illuminating itself. And Newton, if he existed, he became one with the mind of the cosmos when he discovered the laws of gravitation. And then I wrote about wrote about Schelling and his transcendental idealism, and I know I've read partly the book in English. He says that the purpose of scientific activity is the spiritualization of nature, to remove the material aspect and to transform through a cognitive process the given world into a world of law and a spirit and immateriality in a way. And that's what the modern scientists, the empirically minded physical scientists, do unconsciously. They are cognitively annihilating, by a thinking activity, the very existence of the physical world. So the modern scientists should read Schelling, and they would understand themselves. But the better, they should read Hegel, but yeah. I said to myself, while watching this video, that I, not as an empirical individual, but my higher self, my cognitive faculty of thinking and reasoning, I am the world, and the world is me. That's the transcendental ego of Fichte, and that's what Hegel calls reason. And I said I would prefer not to, because there are things in the world and in me that I don't like. And Hegel says that consciousness, in its very concept, must become self-consciousness. And in order for consciousness to become self-consciousness, it must be opposed to an other, a not-self, which enable the retreating back into the self and to become conscious of itself. And that it is in the very concept of consciousness to become reason, to discover that the world standing opposed to it is itself. So I was programmed, ever since I became conscious of a world and conscious of myself, to become reason. I said that reason is using me. That's the cunning of reason. So I think that I speak as an empirical individual, where in my best moments it is reason who speaks through me, and in my worst moments it is also reason who will use my worst ideas against me. So yeah, and I am putting the blame on reason, and someday I think reason will put the blame on me, and I will be in a difficult situation. But yeah. Then I wrote about God, which is the Hegelian view of God. God is good because he allows individuals to live apparently separated lives. But this separation from God, which is freedom, is also the formal definition of evil. Evil is that which is separated from God. And God is also evil because he wants to claim what is his own, to retake, to reestablish, to recover his own self by bringing back the individuals into his own totality. And this can appear as evil, but actually this is justice, because Hegel says that justice is the universal which brings the individual back to the universal. It is the balance. So in being good, by allowing individuality and freedom, God is also evil, and in being evil, by being the judge of everything, he's also good. So there's this dialectical interaction within God, because separation from God is good in the sense that it enables to experience the world and to experience the self, and it is the condition of freedom which is only apparent. But it is also evil because when we are in the world, we all experience lack, degradation, suffering, trouble, pain. And the reunion with God is both good and evil. And I said that God is complex. He's a very complicated being. And also a dialectical trick is that those who suffer the most in existence, for them the reunion with God will be a joy. It will be sweet because all their suffering will vanish. And for those who thrive, those who are rich, intelligent, successful, who have a good life, they may be bitter, but that their life will end, their individual existence will end because of their reunion with God. So there's this bittersweet aspect, but yeah. So yeah. So yeah, I wrote that goodness and justice are reciprocally determining and limiting one another. They have their own measure, and according to Hegel, this is what Leibniz already understood. I wrote that the world, as reason, the world works for me by bringing its own self-consciousness, and that my job is now to work for the world, to give back to the world what the world has given me, because all my knowledge of the world and the information that I have gathered and the understanding that I have been able to grasp, it was given to me by the world, by all the minds of scientists and the personal experiences and the intellectual discoveries of men and women. And now it's time for me to give back to the world what the world has given me. And the only thing that I can bring to the world is the perspective of the negative, which is also that which might bring light and positivity into the world. Yeah. I also wrote about the figures of consciousness that we find in the book by Hegel. I wrote that as reason is schizophrenic, and that which we call dialectics is that which in the realm of psychology is called schizophrenia. And God suffers from dialectics and from schizophrenia. And I am, as an individual, I am angry, I am bitter, I am cynical. But this bitterness, this anger and this cynicism cannot be projected against anyone but myself. So I am in a negative relationship with myself. And as an empirical individual, I have adopted the point of view of Stoicism, of faith. So I am partly programmed to adopt the figures of consciousness which are described by Hegel in the book, because yeah, I wrote that the negative is insane. You said in the presentation of the diagram of Hegel's phenomenology that consciousness must evolve to the point where the divine is no longer an other, but the divine is within oneself. And I don't know where I said it, but there's a conflict within the mind of God, because when the consciousness becomes divine, it must bear the burden of suffering. So the mind does not want to be divine because it doesn't want to bear the burden of suffering. So the mind wants to be the negative of God and to be the negative. But the negative, when he understands that he is negative, he doesn't want to be the negative anymore, and he wants to rejoin with God, where there is no negativity within God as a conceptual unity. So this is a constant state of conflict and of rejection of self, and that's the madness of the world. And it's not madness, it's dialectical unfolding. I wrote that my higher self, which I know to be reason, and my lower self, which is my empirical me, are in a conflict with one another, and this is very difficult to be in conflict with oneself. Hegel says in the Phenomenology, the book, that the individual which carries within his mind reason or the concept, he says that he is contingent and that he must overcome himself and does not ask anything for himself. That's at the end of the preface. But I wonder, what is the connection between my empirical selfhood and my higher self? Yeah, so I don't know yet, but I try my best to leave aside my empirical self, but it is the most difficult, and I am not Hegel in the sense that I cannot speak in pure logical terms and explain everything in terms of logical necessity and the reciprocal determination of logical categories flowing through one another and bringing forth the whole of the movement of nature and the movement of spirit. But I try to transform my individual empirical experience of the world into a logical view by drawing inspiration from Hegel and to see whether it coincides or not. And finally, I wanted to conclude by saying that I want to help you understand yourself as a determined moment of the unfolding of the absolute ID. And I know that one day you will understand yourself as being a moment in the process of the absolute ID becoming absolutely conscious of itself. And then you will become liberated and you will acquire the consciousness of freedom. You will act freely and consciously as the living agent of this world, historical, spiritual process. And what I ask from you, if I be able to ask you a favor, I don't know, that when you become fully conscious of your spiritual identity, the only thing that you might do for the good of the totality is to organize your knowledge, to systematize, to logically categorize your knowledge with the consciousness of your spiritual identity, and to produce a logical discourse upon your own knowledge and your own perspective, which you already do unconsciously. But when you wake up, so to speak, when you become, when the divine within you is awakened, I would like you to do your best to systematize your knowledge and to participate in the process of the unfolding of the absolute, which is an absolute self-cognition of itself. So yeah, but what you did with all your videos, which I haven't had the time to watch, but especially those on German idealism and those on Hegel, it's already a tremendous achievement. And yeah, so I said what I could say, and I know that you will watch these videos when the proper logical conditions are united for you to watch them and understand them, and hopefully we will find infinity, hopefully.